Well, hello members. Let's talk about a new trade here. It's the RWM. So this is the one-to-one inverse of the IWM. And before we get to looking at the RWM, we really should use our underlying. In this case, the IWM, and then underlying it, of course, is the Russell. So here's the IWM. Now the IWM actually closed over on Friday. This is the iShares ETF. But if you look at the Russell itself, and this is the best, underlying, if you will, the Russell itself failed on Friday to actually get over and close over the highs. And so here's the highs on Friday, 1037.18. That swing point high was 1037.27. Well, today we go to 1044.91. So in other words, we get over it, back underneath it, close under it, right? That's a test failure of a swing point high. And so to repeat that and to actually draw it in visually for you, this is your swing point high, right? So the test was to try to get over that and stay over it. You can see how it goes over it, closes back underneath it. Now, it's also, there's a bunch of big bars here. It's also trying to test into this area, and it didn't quite even get to that one, right? So there was kind of this little zone up there. So as the day was going on, I was watching this, right? And the reason I'm watching it, of course, is that we've come straight off the bottom on this move, and though the angle of ascent has changed a little bit, right, the overall ascent is still maintainable. So we had to wait on some sort of a test failure, right, to even think about some sort of a trade to the other side. So we have a test failure. Note that the angle of ascent here is still 45 degrees, so that's not a big angle of ascent. Question mark today, and when you're looking at the indexes, you don't have the quotes in terms of the volumes. So you kind of fall back in that case, and you look at the volumes on the IWM itself. So what I didn't like today is the IWM had more volume than it had back here. You had 31.5 million shares, 31.98, so you had slightly more volume. So that says, hey, we can test again. But once I get the Russell numbers in, I'll be able to see what the actual volume was on the index, and to me, that's what you really should be looking at. So now let's go and talk about, what is the trade here. So that's the reason for taking the trade. What is the trade? Well, the trade is that this is going to try to retrace off this failure. Where can it retrace to? Well, the first area to retrace to would be that swing point high that it traded at previously, and there's a little area up underneath it. And so it's these two areas. So essentially, if we do the numbers on using the IWM, it's 100.33 and 99.19. If we use the Russell and look at it, right, we could, that's the underlying, that's really the one you should be looking at. The number here on the Russell is 1008.68. And then the trade on the way back is probably this bar, which is 1,569. So that little area there is where it's going to try to retrace back to. That makes sense in terms of the way this has set up. And because it never broke the swing point high, we don't have a retest regenerate situation, right? We're just simply going to come back into support. This whole area is support, but the target on the trade is this top, which is about 1,008. Again, we're trading tonight at 1,033, so we could see about a 25-point move to the downside. That's the trade we're shooting for. And so now if we walk over to the RWM, which is the one-to-one inverse, and if you take those same days and look at them, that trade is going to equate to this swing point low that you see here because it's the opposite. And so the equation here is about 68.57, and then we go back over to this bar, which is the other equal bar, and that's 69.44. So somewhere between there. So if I draw it in for you, we're talking about this area right here. That should be kind of the target area on the way back if this thing does what we want. As far as the stop, it's under today's lows, right? You just give it nothing, because if it is going to push lower, then it's going to simply keep going. In other words, don't look at it from this perspective, but if we go back to the Russell, for example, and I pull the Russell back up, just consider the fact that if it gets over this area, right, this swing point high, what's going to stop it? Well, there is this one little support, resistance up in here, but there's nothing else until you go all the way up here to the swing point lows and you do a retest regen up there. And so when I'm looking at this trade, right, I'm saying, hey, you don't have to give it anything. It did a test failure today. We'll know in a little bit whether the volumes were lighter or not. And we know that they're not going to be that much heavier. If anything, they might be actually lighter, which means it would actually be a complete test failure. You fell both on price and volume, which means we should get some sort of a pullback. And so we're just looking for a retrace, make a little money, look for the next trade. And that's what the environment that we're in, and that's what we should be doing. That's it for today's new trade, the RWM, which is a short on the Russell.